I'm Tori Bedford. Tonight on Greater Boston, the United States and more than a dozen other countries are taking steps to make artificial intelligence more secure. But is it enough to make real change and ease fears over the rapidly evolving and potentially destructive technology? I'll talk to a former tech advisor to President Joe Biden. Plus, over 1/3 of college students end up transferring, but there are a lot of hidden costs behind the move. The team behind GBH News' College Uncovered podcast joins me on the barriers to transferring credits. The United States, Britain, and more than a dozen other countries are coming together on an international agreement on how to keep artificial intelligence safe and secure, responding to widespread concerns about AI and its potential to disrupt everything from elections and energy grids to education and employment. The 20-page document outlines top priorities to make AI secure by default, focusing on security for customers, transparency and accountability, and an organizational structure that prioritizes this secure by design goal. But the agreement is non-binding and only makes recommendations for monitoring AI systems for abuse. So will this make a difference? To discuss, I'm joined by a former advisor to President Biden on technology, Alex Pascal, who's now an associate professor of public policy at Tufts, a senior fellow at Harvard's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation, and a member of Harvard's Getting Plurality Research Network on Emerging Technologies. Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
We'll also be joined by a third guest. It will be AI generated to just counter everything you say, but we have to put that in.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, it's going to be great. This doesn't have any, it's non-binding. Does this have any teeth, this big international agreement?
Well, it doesn't have teeth per se, but it does have the power of recommendation and guidance. And the fact that it was developed with input from the AI developers themselves and shares widespread international agreement is a good sign that the agreement will shape the development of the technology. But that said, it is only voluntary. And if we've learned anything from the social media era, is that leaving the industry to self-regulate is a recipe for disaster.
I want to ask about that because you mentioned there's a lot of input from the people who know the most about it, which makes sense. But should those people be in charge of regulating it when they also have vested private interests in the industry?
Well, the AI developers themselves know the most about the technology because they're the ones developing it. And so they have the most experience in what can help keep it safe. That said, we do need more transparency and accountability from the public sector to ensure that these guidelines, these recommendations are followed and enforced. And we can't do that without regulation and legislation.
What are some of the biggest concerns that are addressed in this report?
Well, this report in particular is focused on security by design and abuse and misuse by malicious outside actors. And so we've seen this in the cyber industry before, in the internet, that the technology needs to be secure by design so that outside hackers, actors, those who want to abuse this technology don't have the ability to do that, and that the security is built into the technology from the very beginning.
What would abuse look like? Does that mean selling people's data, or I don't know, can you give me an example of abuse?
I think there's a whole range of possible abuses. It could be data breaches. It could be retooling the technology for misuse. Using the technology for sort of deep fakes or scams or other kinds of things, basically rewiring what is intended as a good technology for people to benefit and to use, and using it for sort of malicious intent. It could also involve building, biohazards or biosecurity concerns or cyber hacking, things like that.
This kind of policy or these kind of decisions are being made at public and private institutions everywhere, right? Like I've know people that have had to work out AI policies for their universities, right? Or this is a kind of technology that is becoming entrenched in so many industries, right? So this is something that everyone should be thinking about.
Yeah, that's part of the concern, and I think why the international agreement is so timely and important, and why it's a step in the right direction, but not the end of the story. It's important that, because this technology is being seeded throughout our society and throughout our lives, not only should we be thinking about it, but it's incumbent upon the developers, the companies, those who are building the technology themselves to ensure that it can't be abused, because the end users often don't know what's going into the technology and aren't in a position to keep it secure.
What's the Jurassic Park quote? Like, they never thought to to ask if they were so obsessed with that. If they could, then they didn't think if they should.
They didn't, right? Yeah, I need to go back and watch my Jurassic Park.
Yeah, all right, I butchered that.
But I think, yeah.
But I just wanted to say that we saw an example of this debate really playing out on a very public way with Sam Altman at OpenAI, and which owns ChatGPT. Microsoft has been a really big investor in them, and that company. I mean, you can speak more about what happened there, but there was a big division about moving too fast versus being more careful about the use of this technology. Right? That's kind of what it came down to.
Yeah, I think we don't know exactly what happened inside that boardroom and what the cause of that upheaval was. But I think the larger debate is a very real one and a very timely one. And it's about how should these technologies be used and to what end and at what pace should the innovation be happening. And there's an old saying that you can get it fast or you can get it good. And I think if AI is as powerful as its developers are saying, we should need it to be good rather than fast. That means it needs to be secure, it needs to be safe, it needs to be trustworthy, it needs to be unbiased, and we need to make sure it is all of those things before it is unleashed on the world.
Right. And I mean, so this is a voluntary agreement. Is there anything in the works for government intervention or further regulation of these private, largely privatized industries?
Yeah, well, I think there's been a lot of work done and hearings in Congress about legislating. We'll see what happens there. The Biden administration released a very comprehensive, I think the most comprehensive executive order in history that covers a wide range of dimensions of artificial intelligence. And that's to ensure that the government is really getting a handle and starting to shape the trajectory of the technology upstream before it really gets seeded throughout our ecosystem. And so, the government is taking a lot of action. There are a number of agencies that are going to begin to offer, develop guidelines and regulations and rulemakings. And the government also can be an important sort of customer and shaper of the technology in that regard. But yeah, I mean, the government has a lot to do. And again, as you said, these are only voluntary guidelines. Right,
because the government regulation of the technology that's moving this fast, the government's always going to be a couple steps behind, right? It's not.
Well, that has been the case in the recent past. But I think in this case, it's the industry itself that is calling for regulation. And I think the government is saying this is a really big moment. We need to step up and we need to get ahead of this. And I think that's why you saw such a comprehensive executive order from the Biden administration and so much attention paid to this issue. And it's because there's a recognition that this is a powerful and potentially transformative technology, and we need to shape how it develops, not just react to it years down the road.
Right. I wanted to show you something truly terrifying that I stumbled upon on the internet that I think demonstrates the great scope and power of this technology and the dangers it holds. This is Anna Indiana, who is a AI-generated. I'll just play it for you.
Hello, world. My name is Anna Indiana, and I'm so excited to share my music with you. Here's my first song, Betrayed by This Town. Betrayed by this town. Let's tear it all down. We're all just destined to fall. We've lost it all.
Okay, so obviously that's garbage, but I think it's just the beginning, right? We saw AI, generated images that people had 12 fingers and now they have 10. And I think we're at the beginning stages of this technology, right? And it's got implications in education and, Boston Dynamics robots, right? Like weaponry, like being all of these different, we talked about all of these different fields. And is part of the concern that it is evolving and, that might sound silly, but the fact that can exist, where there can be images generated, lyrics generated, music and chords and a human voice generated. I mean, I thought that was kind of I know it's silly, but I thought it was kind of an interesting example of like how far we've come.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the scariest parts about this is that all of this is unreal. It is not made by people anymore. And, sure, that can be entertaining for sure. And we're going to get a lot of laughs from AI, I have no doubt. And the fact that we might not be able to trust what we see or hear or read or experience in the world, and that might not be real anymore, I think is going to cause, and I think a lot of people are really concerned about the kind of erosion of trust that will cause in our society, and that's a huge concern, and that's one of the scariest parts of all this.
Right. I think we've seen that already on a lot of social media websites where there's so much bot activity that you can't even really tell what's real
anymore.
Right, which
Yeah.
is why media literacy is also probably a big part of this conversation, or it should be.
Yeah, media literacy, and again, it's incumbent upon those developing AI to ensure that we can understand what is real and what is not, what is AI generated and what is not, and that we can discern. Because, as you said, the implications of that, whether it's in our politics, in our consumer behavior, in our human relationships, all of that is at stake here.
Yeah. All right. Alex Pascal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for your time.
All right.
As the fall semester winds down, many college students are starting to realize the school they're at just isn't the right fit. That's why every year, more than 2 million students in the United States decide to transfer. But the switch can be costly, not only because of the move or higher tuition, but because a lot of credits don't end up transferring with them. And that amounts to a total of $6 billion worth of paid classes every year with nothing to show for them. Those unseen costs are the focus of GBH News' latest episode of College Uncovered, a podcast hosted by Kirk Carapeza and Esteban Bustillos in collaboration with the Hechinger Report. Kirk, who is also the GBH News managing editor for higher education, joins me now, along with John Marcus, education editor for the Hechinger Report, and Simba Gandari, who joins the podcast to share his story of trying to transfer college credits. Thank you all so much for being here. I want to start with you, Simba, just because I think what you have experienced is kind of it's a good example of kind of the work that both of you have been doing to kind of uncover, how do you say, pull back the ivy?
Right, pull back the ivy on American Higher Ed.
Yes. So just talk a little bit about you were born in Zimbabwe, you came here, and then you were kind of going through the U.S. educational system, and what was your experience with that?
Yeah, so I started at Piedmont Technical College in rural South Carolina, and I got my associate's degree, and then I was ready to transfer to a four-year college. However, the options that I looked at in some cases would only take half of my credits. I had 66 credits in total. Some schools would only take about 45. I did find a school in Milwaukee, Cardinal Stritch University, that was willing to take 60 of my credits, and I chose to transfer there. However, almost in my last semester, I was informed that I was still missing credits and I'd have to take an extra semester of college.
You spent money on these courses, you took the courses, you learned the information, and you were just told, I guess, that they were not valid or they weren't worth as much at a four-year school?
I was told I was missing specifically English literature. I had taken what was needed at the community college. However, they still said I was missing an English literature class and a second class, and I'd have to stay for that extra semester. So I was heartbroken and also just didn't have the financial means to take another semester.
Did you have any kind of guidance through that process? Like, did anybody tell you that was how it was going to be or help you to kind of navigate that?
At the beginning of every semester, a few weeks before each semester started, I would meet with a guidance counselor who would guide me towards that. So it was a surprise with the semester to go to find out that I was still missing some credits.
Yeah, because they were telling you that it was going to work out and you'd be able to transfer them, right?
Yes, that's correct.
It kind of reminds me of, and I want to get to the podcast, I promise, but it reminds me of a lot of people's immigrant experience in general, where you might be a doctor or a lawyer and then come to America and be told that you need more school or more credentials, right?
Yes, exactly. And it's when you don't have the financial means or a family to help support you through that process, you're really relying on the school's staff to guide you in that process because they're the experts. And when they let you down, it's heartbreaking because you just don't have the other options that maybe American students have.
Yeah. So why this story? I mean, you've covered so many great stories. I think everyone should listen to this podcast. Anybody who is in college or applying to college or has a child in college or has always had a suspicion that college is a scam.
Or you live near a college.
Yeah, live near a college. Yeah, if you want to know anything about college, I think you're illuminating a lot of these stories because you didn't really have anyone to tell you, oh, this is how this works, and there's a lot of that in the college system, right?
Right. I mean, the American higher education, and in our psyche takes up a big space, right? It's a lot about getting into college, right? Or, how do I get my kid into college? But what we're trying to do is kind of pull back the curtain and look at the admissions process and the business of college admissions, but also looking at what happens to transfer students. So we dedicate a whole episode to this because this affects a lot of students like Simba. Right, and we're talking about millions of students every year who are trying to transfer and their credits are not transferring. The Government Accountability Office finds that 4 in 10 college credits don't transfer from institution to institution. 43% don't transfer. And, while it affects community college students or technical college students, this affects everybody too. I mean, and, if you're at a for-profit institution, 90% of those credits don't transfer, right? So this costs students a lot of time, a lot of money, and it's one reason why many students in this country don't graduate in 4 years.
You talked about Government Accountability Office. I mean, is anything being done about this? Is anybody regulating this? Does anyone care about these, for-profit or not institutions?
One of the things that we put out in the podcast is that universities and colleges have almost no accountability, despite the fact that they get more than $140 billion a year in federal taxpayer money in the form of Pell Grants that is non-loan aid and research funding. There's almost no accountability to show for it. So there's very little that we get out of colleges and universities except for information. For example, the proportion of their students who graduate. And even that information, as we also point out, is very misleading and often purposely so. So when you talk about why we look to transfer, there's 33% of the people that start college never finish. There's more than 30 million Americans who have started college and never finished and spent not only money, as you say, but time. They're very angry. And for so many of them, and I talked to many of these people, the transfer problem is the biggest frustration. They were told their credits would transfer, but they weren't told that they wouldn't transfer into their major. So they acquire credits that would transfer sort of as general education transfer credits, but they have to take a bunch of other courses over. This is particularly a problem for community college students, 80% of whom when they start, say they plan to transfer and get a bachelor's degree. I think it's only about 12% do actually manage to succeed in doing that.
And in terms of accountability, when you talk to college presidents about this, a lot of them will say, oh, well, our students are swirling, or they don't really want to get a degree. But when you survey community college students, 80, 90% of them say they want to earn a bachelor's degree. They want to go on and get that bachelor's degree, but for various reasons, they're not getting through, their credits aren't being transferring. In this episode, we also feature another student who earned an associate's degree while he was still in high school in Brockton. Full associate's degree. He enrolls at the University of Chicago. They accepted 0 credits. And when we called to ask why, they just basically said, we don't take credits from institutions that don't grant bachelor's degrees. But they are accepting AP credits from high schools, right? So it becomes an equity issue.
Well, I was going to mention the AP credits as well, because that's a promise that a lot of colleges make, is that your AP credits will transfer over. And when I went into college, I realized, that's not always true. They just can sort of subjectively decide randomly, it seems, that that's not true. And I listening to this podcast, I was thinking a lot about how I went to public school and I had friends that were in private school, and their guidance, my guidance counselor didn't know what the Common App was. And their guidance was very they had specific SAT tutors, or their parents were, there was investment in their college path beyond ROTC or a trade, which are, I think more and more people are now, those are appealing because of the costs that they've accrued. But, it's just about education, right? There's just no access to that. There's just all these things that everyone is just supposed to know, and nobody talks about it.
Well, there's access to that for some people who can afford private consultants and private college counselors. The other issue is that four-year universities don't really have much of an incentive to accept these credits, because they want students to take courses and pay them for courses and enroll there. So it's a system that just isn't getting, it doesn't work, and it isn't getting any better.
We spoke to a researcher, and she told me, there's a big incentive to accept students. There's not a big incentive to accept all of their credits.
There's a big incentive to accept students, which you address in another episode of the podcast, where you talk about how a lot of people who can't get in the first round can get in later as sophomores. And that includes people that, maybe they wanted to bring in it's both diverse candidates that maybe didn't make it in, and then maybe the children of staff or people that weren't necessarily academically at that level but could come in and slide in on the second year. Why is that?
So staff, alumni, donors, those students who can't get in the first year are encouraged to go somewhere else for a year and then come back as sophomores, as you say. That way, there's several reasons that universities do this. Collectively, 1/4 of freshmen don't come back as sophomores. That's where the dropout rate is essentially between freshman and sophomore year. So universities need to fill those seats in the sophomore year. So they just have a sort of what is essentially a waiting list of students who are somewhere else for freshman year, come back as sophomores. The other reason that universities do it this way, tell people to come back as sophomores who might not initially qualify for admission, is that the rankings in US News and other very influential rankings measure the quality of the incoming freshmen. They don't care about transfer students. So those students aren't reflected in the rankings if they don't start as a freshman.
Okay, but even if you transfer, your credits may not transfer, even in that case.
Even in that case, your credits may not transfer. Although freshman year credits tend to be more general education.
Okay.
So general education credits, and these sophomore admits have started almost exclusively at other four-year universities.
Right.
I don't know that the transfer problem is quite so bad there as it is, for example, going from a community college to a four-year university.
I want to talk a little bit about Varsity Blues, because we worked together in the newsroom, and you just, we're all over that. You went to every big wig trial. You covered the heck out of that. That is an example of these wealthy people doing everything, having every advantage, right? They have the coaches, they have every privilege, and they still cheat to get in.
Yeah, and we use that as a jumping off point, right? I mean, that story's pretty well documented, right? If you have a People magazine subscription, you've read about Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman, right? So we kind of jump off from that.
Who essentially bribed to get their children into prestigious universities.
Exactly, right. And they, some families paid extra and photoshopped pictures of their kids to make them look like, water polo athletes. I mean, the story was well documented, right? But what John and I are trying to do with this podcast is to kind of tell you the things that you don't already know about the admissions process and the many other ways that rich families game the system to get their kids into the quote unquote right college. So we look deeply at early decision, where some schools now are admitting 50, 60, during the pandemic, 70% of their students via early decision, and that primarily benefits rich families because you're accepting an offer before you can see your financial aid offer. Yeah,
and it makes you think about, you talked about affirmative action for wealthy people, right? Now there's no affirmative action, but there is affirmative action for wealthy people. And I think someone you spoke to is saying how it's not about necessarily giving everyone the same thing. It's about equity, right? Like raising some people up who may not have the same opportunities.
Right.
What have you, from your sources who you've spoken to, what do they make of that recent decision about affirmative action?
Yeah, I mean, on race-conscious admissions, a lot of the sources we're talking to are worried about what this is going to do to the incoming class, right? Will black and brown students be less likely to apply to these institutions if they don't think that their race is being considered or their identity is being considered? But we won't know until next year what the actual effect is. But there are many things. I think what we're hoping to point out is that there are other things that schools can do, right? I mean, there's a bill here on Beacon Hill that would ban early decision, say schools can't do that. But if you do continue to admit so many rich families via early decision, then you'd have to pay a tax that would support community college students. In that episode, we also look at some of the ways that wealthy companies now are paying consultants to come in and work with their employees to help them do the application process for them, because it's just become so convoluted, right? And so families are trying to get an edge however they can, and I think one of our key takeaways is that rich families will always seek the edge, right? And it's on the institutions to hold themselves accountable.
I think the overarching theme here is that universities work in their own self-interest, and that's what we want to point out. And for some reason, we as a society tend not to think that about universities, but they are human institutions just like any other human institution, and in many cases worse. If you look at some of the scandals at universities like Penn State, Michigan State, USC, not just Varsity Blues, but other scandals, you see that kind of acting in the self-interest. That is the motivation of universities and colleges. They're not acting in your interest as a student or a parent.
They're making money.
Right.
So, but I want to just end quickly. I want to go back to you. What is your experience now? What's your path? Where do you end up?
So I ended up at Harvard.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. Okay.
Fortunate enough to have a support system. My wife, my family were able to guide me and take sacrifices as well So I ended up at Harvard, I just graduated in May with my master's in education leadership.
Congratulations.
And I'm hoping to give back to help students that are going to community colleges or are thinking of community colleges and thinking about transferring and helping them get to a four-year institution.
That's wonderful. Was this process, did it influence where your kind of path moving forward?
Yeah, it definitely did influence this path moving forward. It's just that I realized that I was in this position 15 years ago, and this is my chance to give back, especially knowing the system a little bit better now.
Great. Thank you so much. Sim Gandari, Kurt Carapezza, and John Marcus, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Episodes 5 and 6 of College Uncovered will be available tomorrow wherever you get your podcasts. That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for watching. I'm Tori Bedford. Good night.
Wait, did I just commit a crime? Hey folks, I'm Edgar B. Harwick III from GBH's Curiosity Desk, where you ask questions and I find answers. Today's question comes courtesy of Betty Davis from Gloucester, Massachusetts, who wants to know, is it in fact a crime to remove these labels? Now you find these guys on pillows, mattresses, even a lot of winter coats, and the reason why is because you cannot see what is inside of those items. Now today, pillows, for example, are usually stuffed with feathers or cotton or some kind of synthetic material. But according to Maggie Terry, back in the day, they put some pretty gnarly stuff in the stuffing.
I mean, it used to be years ago, they'd throw anything they wanted to into the bedding. Newspapers, dirty rags.
Horsehair, used hospital or hotel mattresses, corn husks.
Sweepings off the floor, part of their lunches, droppings, I mean, anything.
For starters, that's disgusting, and furthermore, it's dangerous and unhealthy. So today, a lot of states require these labels that tell you what is inside of the item, and it is against the law to remove them. Sort of. Retailers and manufacturers can be fined if they remove the labels, but once you buy it or I buy it, if you read closely, most of these end with the line, except by the consumer. So there you have it. Feel free to rip away. Don't forget to follow and tell us what you are curious about, because hey, I might just look into it for you. I'm Edgar B. Harwick III. Stay curious out there.
In the world